Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the third in our 2016 webinar series with David Ackert, Time Management for Busy Lawyers, Increasing Efficiency in a Demanding Work Environment. This series is brought to you by the International Lawyers Network, of which your firm is a valued member. The ILN is an association of 91 high-quality, full-service law firms with over 5,000 lawyers in 67 countries on 6 continents. Some housekeeping notes. To ask questions, please use the chat box on your screen, and I'll ask these of David. We'll be sharing the PDF of the presentation slides along with the recording following the session. Our next webinar with David takes place on September 22nd from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and is on business concepts for business lawyers, understanding the drivers your clients care about. We invite you to register if you haven't yet done so. Our presenter today and throughout the series is David Ackert. David is the president of the Ackert Advisory and mentor to high-achieving professionals in the legal profession. He has developed and implemented business development programs for countless firms from AmLaw 100s to local boutiques. Widely recognized as an e-learning pioneer in the legal field, David is the founder of Practice Boomers, a business development e-learning program and 2-time winner of the Legal Marketing Association's Your Honor Awards. He is also the founder of Practice Pipeline, a pipeline management software platform that incorporates business development coaching. The combination of technology and coaching has become a hallmark of his programs. So with that, I'll pass over the microphone to David for his presentation.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Always great to have an opportunity to speak to the ILN community. And today the topic is time management, something which I think you'll all find to be universally relevant. I wanted to take a moment and give you a little bit of background on how time management came to be something that we had to develop some expertise in. You know, our firm specializes primarily in business development and business strategy for law firms. But as you can imagine, one of the first objections and concerns that we would hear from law firms is, well, you know, David, all this sounds well and good, but we just don't have the time to implement it. You know, business development, we know it's important, but the number of hours we're billing and the kinds of client demands that we're dealing with, we just don't have much control over our time, and we certainly can't free up non-billable time to do meaningful business development. Or, you know, the strategic plan that you've helped us develop, it all looks good on paper, but ultimately it requires implementation. So we had to start to get our heads around how to offer strategies to lawyers and their firms that would assist them in taking what is already an overwhelming, consuming practice and somehow find a way to put other priorities into the mix such that they could be taken seriously and ultimately acted upon consistently. So we're drawing from some of those strategies today and presenting them to you, and hopefully they will be assistful as you go about navigating the various priorities that you find on your desk. We're going to break today's program into 2 components. There's managing yourself, and then there's managing others. Those are kind of the 2 buckets, if you will, and both of those have a time management impact, an impact on your efficiency. We're going to start with multitasking, then we'll talk about time wasters. We all are guilty of a few time wasters that perhaps we indulge in. Some of them we can do something about, some of them perhaps we can only mitigate slightly, but either way we should be aware of them. We'll develop a proactive workflow system. I'm here to challenge you that most of you are engaged in a reactive workflow system, and we'll talk about how to perhaps adjust that to your benefit. And then we'll move into managing others. We'll talk about communication, which mode of communication to use in which circumstance so as to minimize the amount of time and perhaps even fallout that can occur when we apply the wrong forum to the wrong situation. We'll look at managing meetings, making requests, and ultimately minimizing interruptions. A quick note, I would encourage you to take out a piece of paper for this presentation because I am going to ask you to write down a few things, and I think you'll find that if you are able to bring some of your own work to this, you'll find it to be even more customized and even more relevant. So take out a piece of paper and a pen and just have it at the ready. We'll go through a couple of quick exercises where you can jot some things down that I think you'll find helpful. All right, so let's start with managing yourself. Consider that the greatest impact you can have on your experience of time comes from the way that you manage yourself. So yes, sure, it's easy for us to point the finger and say, you know, I get a lot more done if it wasn't for all of these interruptions, or if only, you know, firm leadership was willing to give me more time, then perhaps I would have better life balance, or I'd have more time for business development, or I'd have more time for practice management. Always easy for us to point the finger outside of us, but I would like you to consider that if you turn that finger around and point it to yourself, you'll be looking at the source of a lot of the inefficiencies, and perhaps, and most of these are unconscious, by the way. We don't even realize that we're doing this to ourselves. We certainly aren't consciously not necessarily be serving our interests. Consider that none of you, myself included, ever went to time management class in school. There was no such thing. So we just sort of learned through the school of hard knocks how to be as efficient as we possibly could. And consider that, you know, on the first day of your first summer internship or your first job, whatever that might have been, they plunked you down in front of a computer, they gave you an email account, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a bunch of stuff to do, now, you know, figure it out. And we didn't even get any training on how to use email efficiently. We just developed this attitude that says, if I work harder, if I, you know, stay focused, if I just push myself as hard as I can, then I'm going to be able to produce optimum results. And I think that there are perhaps more sophisticated ways of looking at this that will be helpful today. So one of the things that we want to look at, and this is going to be one of the places where if you can really bring some self-discipline to this and break some old habits, you will find that it makes a meaningful difference in your ability to get more done in a day. So there's this thing that we've been doing for a while now, or at least it's been termed. We've been probably doing it for a long time. But it's recently been termed multitasking. Some people call it switch tasking, which is probably a more accurate way of describing it. But you know, we can only accomplish one cognitively complex task at a time. That's the way our brains are designed. And so when we try to do more than one cognitively complex task at a time, what we're actually doing is switching between cognitively complex tasks. So we can do one cognitively complex task and then perhaps one cognitively simple task at the same time. For instance, you can be driving and listening to the radio. Listening to the radio is passive, it's simple, it doesn't require any kind of cognitive complexity. But if you try to text while you drive, you're going to find that it's much harder, right? Now, I'm sure none of you have ever done this, but if you are actually doing two things that require your full focus, you're either going to find that there are typos in your text, or you're going to find that you're veering away from your lane on the car. That's just the way our brains are set up. And so you'll find that there's an increase in mistakes, even if you talk on the phone or write an email at the same time. Some people try to get away with this. You can hear them tapping away in the background while they're talking to you on the phone. Clearly, they're writing an email to someone else while they're talking to you, and chances are there's going to either be an error in the email or they're going to zone out from the phone call for a moment. So there's the temptation to do this. You know, we're billing in 6-minute increments. We're trying to get as much done as we possibly can. We're trying to keep the billables up. But the fact of the matter is that the multitasking, which is really switch tasking between cognitively complex tasks, leads to errors. It also leads to inefficiency, and we don't realize that. We think we're being efficient, highly efficient, when we're multitasking. We fool ourselves into thinking, ha-ha, I did two things at once, which means that it took half as long to do each of them when you add it all up. But the fact of the matter is that we had to switch back and forth between one mental neural channel in order to get these two things done, because ultimately this is a binary system. Now, I'm going to take you through a quick exercise here that will prove this point. So this is where I want you to take out that piece of paper. And what you're going to do is on the first line on the piece of paper, when I say go, okay, so we're going to give you a few seconds to do this, you're going to write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You're going to jot down as many numbers as you can in consecutive order, okay? So when I say go, you'll do that, and then we'll time it. And then I'll say go again, and you'll write down the words multitasking takes time, and we'll time that, okay? So very simple exercise. on your mark, when I say go, we're going to just write down 1, 2, 3, 4, as many numbers as you can do in the 10 seconds I'm going to allow you. All right, on your mark, get set, go. So you should be writing down now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many can you get in here? We're 5 seconds in. And that's 10 seconds. So stop. Okay, so hopefully you got a bunch of numbers in there because it doesn't take you very long to write down 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to time it one more time, and I'm going to ask you to write down the words multitasking wastes time. Ready, get set, go. So right now you should be writing down the word multitasking. Some of you have already jotted over to wastes. Some of you are already done. And here we are with 10 seconds, so stop. Okay, so that was pretty easy, right? Because you were focused on one of these cognitively complex tasks at a time. Now we're going to switch between the two. We're going to do switch tasking. This would be as if you were on the phone talking to someone and you're also composing an email to someone else at the same time. So what you're going to do is you're going to write, when I say go, the number 1, and then you're going to switch down to M, and then you're going to write the number 2 on the top line, and then you're going to switch down to the lower line and write U, and then you're going to jump back up to the top line and jot down 3, and then you're going to jump down to L. So you're going to switch back and forth between these tasks, and we're going to time to see how far you get. On your mark, get set, go. So hopefully you're switching back and forth between the two. That's 5 seconds. And there we are with 10 seconds. Stop. So I wonder how far into this you got. Most of you probably got 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 down the first row, and maybe you got M, U, L, and T on the second row. So you see, the efficiency for these two tasks is significantly impacted because we have to switch back and forth. Our brain is switching between the two gears, and then there's, of course, the time, even though it's just a millisecond that it takes between going from one row to the other and using a different part of our brain between the numbers and the letters. So this should give you some sense of the inefficiency that tends to come about when we're switch tasking, and we're doing this all day long. The other thing that you may notice is that your handwriting might not be as clear as it was originally, or perhaps there's a misspelling. Your brain got a little confused on spelling out multitasking. Your stress level probably went up significantly because writing down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is a very low stress activity, and writing down the words multitasking takes time, doesn't require a lot of stress, but switching back and forth and getting both of them right and making sure that you're doing it as quickly as possible and starting to realize that this is taking longer than you wanted, that does increase stress levels. So again, a lot of times when we're trying to be efficient, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice and we don't even realize it. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do today is practice Uni-tasking. Or single tasking, which really means focus on this program. You've got about 45 minutes where you're just going to do one thing. I dare you to do it. Let's see if we can actually get that done without having to switch back and forth and potentially miss some of the valuable insights that you may glean from today's program. So the takeaway here, obviously, is you want to bring your full focus to each individual task. Don't buy in to the misperception that if you do 2 or 3 things at once, you are somehow buying yourself time. You're also going to find that this reduces your stress because you're bringing a mindful presence and a concentration to whatever it is that you're working on. It will increase the efficiency and the quality of your work product to Uni-task as well. All right, let's move on to another element of self-management where we will identify some areas where you can increase your efficiency. So we all have time wasters in our day. It might have something to do with poor planning or ad hoc time management systems, like just powering through email rather than having a system set up on our inbox, which I'm going to get to in a moment. Many of us multitask, and of course we talked about how that can be a time waster. There are interruptions that are constantly going on, whether from colleagues or whether from clients. So here we are, we're trying to draft a document, and then all of a sudden the phone rings, or your phone starts buzzing, or somebody pops their head in the office and says, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And now we've got to stop, and then we'll have to come back to it later. Poor communication with colleagues can certainly waste time. Poor delegation on your part or others wastes time. Sometimes interpersonal issues can be a culprit here. Sometimes we just don't have the technology that we need, or perhaps our computers are a little slower than we'd like. We all have bad habits that waste time. Surely we're all guilty of procrastination from time to time. And then there's, of course, the physical elements of poor focus or fatigue that come about if we aren't well rested and we aren't taking care of ourselves. These are all things that can lead to wasted time. So one of the things that I'd like to ask you to do here, oh, and don't forget clutter. Those of you who don't keep an organized workspace will find that you waste time trying to find things. And just as before, when you were thinking to yourself, multitasking, come on, that doesn't really waste that much time, but then hopefully this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 multitasking waste time exercise that I just took us through gave you some insight into how much time that really does waste. You might start to consider that things like procrastination, clutter, and some of these other things are wasting more time than you may realize. So take a moment and just write down, what do you think are your top 3 time wasters from this prior list? Or, you know, this is not intended to be exhaustive. There may be other things as well that you know waste your time. There could be one person in particular in the office. You know, Larry's always wasting my time. He's always coming by and just kind of talking to me, and I wish he'd stop, or whatever it is. So take a moment. What are those 3 time wasters? And how much time do you think they eat up in an average week? Is it 20 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it more than an hour? And how much is an hour of your time worth? Obviously, this is your billable rate. So you start to do the math and you realize, wow, these are not only time inefficient, they're also money inefficient. It's actually costing me money because for every hour that I bill, I get to take some of that home. And, you know, these time wasters are having a negative effect on my pocketbook. There's actually a direct impact to me besides just the stress or the efficiency piece. So it's important to set in place a proactive workflow system so that we can get in front of some of these time wasters and try to address them more effectively. Now, you know, one of the things that you want to recognize is that the legal profession is by nature reactive. You have nothing to do unless a client has a need. So you are completely reactive to their need for you. It's very difficult to put in place proactive legal services because, of course, legal services, lawyers, they solve problems. They solve client problems. If the problem hasn't been presented to you, there's no solution that is necessary. So you are already in a business model that is going to be reactive. So it's important to the extent possible to place a proactive workflow system into this reactive model so that you can take as much control back as possible. Otherwise, you'll find yourself spending days doing little more than putting out fires, most of them being client fires, without ever realizing your peak performance. If you were placed in an environment where you could think ahead, plan ahead, and really make sure that you are going to get the things, your objectives accomplished when you want to accomplish them, that would be very different from the work environment that you are most likely currently experiencing. So there's 3 components to a proactive workflow system. One is setting daily targets. The second is to organize your workflow priorities. And then the third is do a regular goal review. We're going to go through each of these steps in a moment. And again, consider that most lawyers just try to power through. They get the client demand. They now understand that the client has certain expectations. They know that there are deadlines associated with that, so they just start working and sprinting as hard as they can. Obviously, they're billing as they go, so they're profiting from this. But there isn't necessarily a workflow system in place that has them identify daily targets, organize their workflow priorities, and ultimately do some sort of goal review. The only goal review is the client saying, okay, you got done what I wanted you to, now here's the next thing. Many of us in this profession tend to have a little bit of a workaholic nature. We like what we do, or we just feel compelled that we have to do as much of it as we possibly can. And of course, there's the fact that there are billable hour requirements hanging over our heads. And so we define a productive day based on the number of hours that we bill, perhaps, or just, you know, did we get done the things that needed to get done given the deadlines that we had to deal with. Most of us accomplish about 100+ tasks every day. This includes emails, meetings, projects, forms. There may be client needs that you directly had to address, conversations with clients, et cetera. But we always leave the day with this sense that we never got it all done. You know, it just all kind of resets the following day. So consider how you're defining productivity, because if you're living through this I never get it all done kind of a mentality, that can be very stressful and not particularly satisfying. It's sort of like trying to eat an infinitely large pie. So one of the things you want to consider is setting targets for the day. At the start of each day, set 3 to 5 targets. Now, some of these may be deadline driven. Some of them may be targets that you're setting because they are goals of yours. Maybe they're practice development goals or business development goals that help you define the bullseye on the dartboard so that, yes, much of the day will be reactive, but here are 3 to 5 things that I'm going to get done for me because it is a priority that I say will define a productive day today. Now, in order to make a clearer point of this, I'm going to reference Stephen Covey's priority matrix. If any of you have ever read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it's a great book, and he dedicates at least one chapter in here on time management. And he talks about this ABCD system, where you either have tasks that are urgent and important, and those would be A's. These are crises, emergencies, pressing problems, deadline-driven projects. It's urgent and important. And then there are B's, which are important. They're still important, but they're not urgent. This might have to do with preparation or planning, maybe doing a little bit of research. You know, you can show up to that meeting at 10 o'clock because it's urgent and important. But if you showed up prepared to that meeting, then you actually carved out a little extra time. It was important to show up prepared. It may not have been urgent to show up prepared, but it meant that you were more confident in your ability to provide value at that meeting. Then there's also personal things like exercise. Exercise is important, but it's not urgent. There's no deadline around it. It's basically just up to us to do that and find the time for it. Relationship building is important. It's just not urgent. There's no deadline on it. And some people procrastinate that for a lifetime, and you know, they find that it has the impact that it has, whether it's on their personal lives or in their business development or whatever it might be. Sometimes we, as much as we recognize that vacations are really important for our frame of mind, because they're not urgent, we don't take as many of them as we know we should. Then if you go down to the second row here, there are things that are not important, but they are urgent. They're still deadline driven. It's just not as important if we hit that deadline. And so sometimes these are the deadlines that we'll procrastinate or the things that we just won't get around to. Maybe somebody sends you an email and says, hey, will you get back to me on this? And, you know, you can get back to them or you can not get back to them. It's not going to make a big difference in your world, and you just have to assume that they're going to be able to go somewhere else to find this information if they need it. So, you know, it's urgent, sure, especially for them, but it's not important enough to trump your A's or B's. And then, of course, there are the D's, which are not urgent or important, and sometimes we find ourselves hanging out there as well, dealing with junk mail, trivia, listening to some phone messages that we could probably just delete given who they're from. The time wasters that I mentioned earlier would fall into this category. So the key here is to make sure that you are spending as much of your time possible. Now, you're going to think I mean A's, but I actually don't. I mean in the B's. The B's are the things that we tend to procrastinate and push off. Now, you're going to deal with the A's because they're deadline driven, because they're important and urgent, and because you recognize that these are the emergencies that simply require your attention. But when the A's, and perhaps sometimes the C's, because we tend to get so deadline driven, end up being where we spend most of our time, then the B's are procrastinated. And the B's tend to speak to the quality of our work, the quality of our life, the quality of our practice. So A is going to focus on the quantity of things that we accomplish. The B's are going to speak to quality. And so to the extent possible, we want to try to carve out time for those B's, for preparation, for planning, for thinking ahead, thinking downstream further than the next 6-minute increment or perhaps the next month. What is your practice going to look like in a year? How can you start planning for that? Who are the relationships that you want to start nurturing, the mentors or the people that you want to mentor so that your firm can be what you want it to be in the years to come? These are the kinds of things that fall into the B quadrant and which often get pushed because we're so consumed with the A's and the deadline-driven C's. Then there's another category, which is Ps, and that's things that are pending. These are things that we've delegated either to our clients, we're waiting for them to get back to us, or to other people at the firm, and they do need to live on our list. We can't just ignore them. We can't forget about them, because if the person that we delegated this to drops the ball, then ultimately it's still our responsibility to pick that ball back up. So we've got to have a place to log the Ps as well. So one of the things that I like to do is to use Outlook to identify some of these things. And what I'll do is recommend this virtual Taskpad feature. Now, some people don't use the Taskpad in Outlook. Maybe they've got a legal pad that they're jotting their daily targets down on, or maybe they've got a whiteboard or something like that. You're going to find a virtual Taskpad has some advantages over paper. It's a centralized list. It reduces all the clutter that you're going to find if you're using other management structures. You can set a start date. Incomplete tasks automatically roll over, so you're not copying yesterday's list over to today's list if you didn't accomplish something. You can establish recurring tasks. You can prioritize. It's archived and it's searchable. The way you get to it is you just click Taskpad in your Microsoft Outlook here, and it opens up this list over here next to your calendar. So it's just a way to see, okay, here are the things that I need to get done today. And you can prioritize them by A, B, C, D, or P as we just went through. So one of the ways I do this is when I open a new task, I just place an A in the at the beginning of the subject line, and then when I list this on my Taskpad, it's going to show up in alphabetical order. I can also attach a document here to the Taskpad, which I can't do on my whiteboard or on my legal pad, and that way everything I need regarding Jim's contract is right here in the task. I start with the priority. I can set a start date if I want, and that way this task won't even show up on my list until tomorrow or the day after, because I know that that's when I'm going to be focused on it. And of course, I'll usually put an ellipsis here in the subject line to remind me that I have something in the notes field that I need to pay attention to. So when I sort alphabetically by title, the A's and the B's and the C's and the D's and the P's all show up in the right order. The tasks automatically sync to the Reminders app. If you're using an iPhone, it also syncs to other platforms, Androids, et cetera. And what I'll usually put on the Taskpad is anything that I can accomplish but takes a minute or longer, because if I can accomplish it in under a minute, then I might as well just get it done, right? So if you can just delete an email, delete the email. You don't need to set a task to delete the email. Or if it's about filing a piece of paper in your office, just walk over and file it. You want to get those things off your plate, because as they start to pile up, you're going to find that you are touching them multiple times, and now it is creating an inefficiency for you. So keeping a clean inbox is also a part of this. Many of you have an inbox, an email inbox, that is a huge time waster, and you're not aware of that because you haven't come up with a workflow system. We're going to talk about that in a moment, that manages your email more effectively. So you want to make sure that you're using the Taskpad to accomplish the things that you can that will take a minute or longer. If it takes less than a minute, just do it. Email a quick reply, do it. File a quick piece of paper, do it. Now, if there's a project with multiple components, you're going to break it into actionable steps. Otherwise, you're going to have a huge project on your Taskpad, and that'll be something also that you may be inclined to procrastinate on. So break these apart into their actionable steps. And if it's going to take 20 minutes or longer, calendar it. Don't put it in your Taskpad. The Taskpad should be the place where you set your targets that you're going to bang out one after the next. Anything that's going to take 20 minutes or longer, you're probably going to need to carve time into the calendar for anyway. All right, now let's talk about email setup. What I like to do is set up subfolders in my inbox. So I use my inbox as the A folder, and then I set a B, C, D, and P subfolder under my inbox. And that way, when an email comes in and I think to myself, okay, this is important, but it's not urgent, I drag it to the B. And now it's out of my primary inbox. I don't have to keep looking at that email over and over again. I don't have to scroll past it to get to another email. I'm not using some funky flag system or marking an email as unread when in fact I have read it just to trick myself so that I can look at it again later. All of these systems, and it's fine, you know, if this is what you do and it really works for you, then keep doing it. But consider that the email inbox is a terrible Taskpad. It was never designed to be that. It was just meant to be the place that people can send you messages. And so anybody with your email address suddenly has access to your Taskpad if you're using your email inbox as your primary Taskpad. So that's not necessarily going to be the best way for you to keep yourself efficient. So one of the things that I like to do is when an email comes in, I immediately look at it, I assess, all right, is this an A, B, C, D, or is this related to something that I've already delegated, a pending? I will drag it to the necessary folder. If it's an A, I keep it in my inbox because I know I'm going to be looking in my inbox several times a day. Obviously, client demands, emergencies, anything like that, that's going to stay in the inbox for me to deal with today. But if it's something that I can set expectations, hey, listen, thanks for this, I'm going to get to it tomorrow, or let's talk about this on Friday, I'll just drag it to my Bs, or I'll set it as a task, which I'll show you how to do in a moment. Make sure that you right-click on these folders in Outlook, and you, when you do that, it's going to bring up a pop-up that shows you how you can indicate show total number of items. You always want that clicked here because by default, it's going to show you a number of unread items, and that's not going to be helpful for you. You want to know how many Bs, C, Ds, and Ps you've filed in these subfolders so that you can get to them and you have a sense of what your targets are going to look like for the day. Now, as I mentioned, you can turn an email into a task. It's very easy. All you do is you take the email, you drag it to the tasks button down here, and when you release it, it shows up as a task. And the body of the email will show up in the notes section of the task. You can click actions and edit the message if you like, and that way you're developing your email here into something that is going to be a task that you can actually work with. I tend to have a paper system as well. Sometimes I go in and out of this, but it's always a good idea to have A, B, C, D, a P if necessary, folders, or perhaps you have file folders on your desk. But, you know, to the extent that you want to adopt this system, you can get it so that it's networked across your entire workflow system. When I delegate something, I've taught the people to whom I delegate in my company this same system. And so, for instance, you know, somebody sent me something about a trip that I have to book shortly. So I just forwarded this to Jordan, who handles my travel, and I just put an A in the subject line, and she knows that that's something that I expect her to do today. So she's going to add that to her A targets in her Taskpad. And now we're speaking the same language. There isn't a, you know, sorry, David, I didn't get to that today because I had other priorities that I was dealing with. She knows that my expectation is that this is a priority that she's going to focus on today. Or sometimes I'll tell her, hey, this is a B. Get to it after you're done with your A's. It's not as urgent for me. And that way we're speaking, as I say, the same language. All right, let's move over to goal review. Goal review occurs on a regular basis, but it's not as detailed, or perhaps a better word is it's not as short-term as your daily targets. So goal review might be weekly, it might be bi-weekly, it might be monthly, but think of it as sort of, you know, when your firm does a firm retreat, where everybody kind of takes a step back and looks downstream and looks at how things are going and tries to plan for the future. Well, you want to be doing something for yourself like this on a fairly regular basis. Again, it can be monthly. If you want to do it at the end of every month, that's fine. But you got to catch your breath, examine those B objectives that you've probably been procrastinating because you've been so consumed with A's, and really take that elevated perspective. So this is where you're looking at, okay, what are the ideal outcomes that I'm trying to accomplish, and how far off from those am I? What are the key relationships I need to improve? Who's on that short list of my top clients, and how am I going to develop those relationships? Who are my best referral sources, and when was the last time I really sat down with them and explored business synergies? Who are the prospective clients that I'm pursuing, and have I been keeping the appropriate level of pressure on those relationships to make sure that I'm on their radar and they're thinking of me? Who are the relationships internally at the firm that are important to maintain, and, you know, do I need to schedule a lunch? These are the kinds of questions you want to take a moment to ask yourself. Just go through a checklist like this so that you don't find that 6 months or, you know, 2 years went by and you neglected some of these key components. Are there any projects that you want to start or complete? What are you putting off? Are there challenges that you want to overcome, or perhaps there's some skill building that you need to deal with? Perhaps there's something that's been keeping you up at night and you're just not dealing with it. It's time to figure out a plan to do that. Maybe get some mentorship on this, or talk to a colleague whose advice you trust. Perhaps there are other personal or professional priorities that need to be dealt with. But this is really important, and it's something that very few people do. And if you don't do it, those B projects end up being rather vague. There's sort of niggles in the back of your head that you, you know, just sort of try to push away. And it tends to diminish the quality of work-life balance. It tends to diminish the quality of your practice as well in the long term. You'll certainly bill plenty of hours in the short term, but is that really where you want things to go downstream? You have to be putting some thought into that as well. And without a specific plan or deadline, Bs tend to be procrastinated indefinitely. We've all seen this happen with exercise or diets or anything that requires a certain amount of self-discipline. If we say, oh yeah, I'll get to it later, we oftentimes just never get around to it. This is going to be in the PDF that Lindsay gives you, but this is just a way that you might want to consider using this goal review process. It has all of these categories that I just mentioned. You can use it as a template, give it an ABCD, and maybe there's a task that flows out of that you want to assign to yourself and give a deadline to. Okay, so now we've got daily targets every day. We've got you're organizing your priorities through ABCDP, and this workflow is networked into perhaps your paper systems or certainly your email, your Taskpad if you're using that. You're practicing Uni-tasking, very important. And then finally you have goal review once a month. This goes into that notion of self-management that I talked about in the beginning, because all of this self-management you're going to find improves your efficiency. It improves the degree to which you're tackling problems strategically. It improves the degree to which you are prepared for your priorities and that you're prioritizing your priorities in a way that is guided by your best judgment, not based on what somebody else said you should be doing. Now, again, you have to be responsive to your managing partner and your practice group leader and your clients and all of that. So there is going to be a lot of reactive activity in your practice, but there also needs to be some proactive activity. Otherwise, you're going to find that, as I said earlier, you're just putting out fires all day long. Okay, so we've spent some time on managing yourself. This will help you be more efficient, certainly. When it comes to managing others, the objective is not to be more efficient, actually. It's to be more respectful. You actually save time when you are more respectful of other people. Go figure. So, we've all seen what happens here. Sometimes when in our attempt to be efficient, we can be disrespectful. We don't respond to that email because we just didn't have time for it, and then suddenly somebody feels like they are being ignored. Or perhaps somebody walked into our room, into our office, and they said, okay, I want to talk to you about something, and we were in the middle of something, and rather than give them the time of day, we were curt with them, or we sort of rushed them along, and, they felt snubbed in some way. This sort of thing happens all the time at the law firm, especially in an environment where people are expecting that there's going to be a certain amount of congeniality. We are partners, after all. We're using this word partnership, so of course we want to be treated respectfully, but because it's such a high-pressure environment, sometimes that respect doesn't get communicated. And the reason that that has an impact on efficiency is because the fallout can be incredibly detrimental to our ability to get things done effectively. All of a sudden, we may have inadvertently snubbed someone, and now we find that they're not being cooperative when we need them. They're not responding to our emails. They're not showing up to a meeting that we called. They always seem to have an excuse when we want their help. Or when it comes time, let's say that they're in a position above us, it comes time for our review, they're going to make it that much harder to accomplish our goals. So you see, this sort of thing can be incredibly impactful in the degree to which we are able to accomplish our goals. And so we have to make sure that we are bringing a certain amount of time and attention to the interactions that we have with others so that we are being respectful of them. One of the ways that we can do this is through the hierarchy of communication. Now, consider that there are always only two things that you're communicating to others. You're either saying to them, I respect you and you matter to me, your time is valuable to me, I value what you have to say, or you're saying, I don't respect you, you don't matter to me, your time is not valuable to me. There's nothing in the middle. Sometimes we think there's this gray zone in the middle where, we can just sort of not be particularly respectful, but at least we're not being overtly disrespectful. Consider that that's probably being perceived as disrespectful. When you stonewall someone, obviously if this is a legal strategy, then go for it. But if you're stonewalling someone in your office, being passive-aggressive with them, what have you, chances are they're taking it personally. It's just the way that we tend to be with each other. So that is going to likely cost you down the road when it comes back around for something that you'll need from them. You want to make sure that you're putting an extra emphasis on making sure that you are communicating to people that you respect them and they matter to you, their time is valuable. So let's take a look at how we can do this through the hierarchy of communication. Now, we all use these various modalities of communication all the time. And social media, email, we use a lot of email, we're texting, sometimes we'll leave a voicemail message. These are all one-way communications. It's just you saying something to somebody else. It's a monologue, if you will. There's no dialogue. And as we go higher up this chain, we find that our influence over the outcome also increases. Now we're in a phone conversation where there's a two-way dialogue, or a private face-to-face meeting. That's where you have the most influence over the outcome. I have no influence over the outcome with social media, right? That's just me blasting something on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it is. You know, I can hope that someone will look at it, and I can hope that someone will read it. Or if I publish an article or post a blog, I can hope that someone will do something with that, but I have very little influence over that outcome. With email, I have a little bit more influence over the outcome, maybe if I'm texting them. With a voicemail message, now they can hear the tone of my voice, and I can actually start to influence them using my tone. So certainly email writing has a certain tone to it, but many times that can be misconstrued. With voicemail, now that they can hear the inflection of my voice, they understand what I'm trying to get out even better. And then, of course, if it's a two-way phone conversation or private face-to-face, you have the most influence over outcomes. So when the stakes are high, you want to move up the hierarchy of communication, because even though you might think to yourself, well, it gets less efficient, the fact of the matter is that it is going to have a greater degree of influence over the outcome. Of course, the time intensiveness goes up as well, which is why so many of us tend to rely on email all day long. It's quick, you bang out the email, there, it's gone, I've said what I have to say. Yes, I sacrificed some influence over the outcome. I suppose I could have picked up the phone and called them, but then there's the dialing and there's the waiting for the phone to ring, and God forbid they pick up the phone. Now I actually have to talk to another human being. I'm going to save myself all that time and send the email. And sometimes that's fine. But remember, you sacrifice influence over outcome, and there are certain circumstances where you're not going to want to do that. So, for instance, let's look at a grid here. If this is just a quick announcement, then social media is fine, email is fine. If I'm just checking in, I'm touching base, you can use a lot of these for that. I just need a short question or answer, I can use social media text, probably email as well for this. If it's just an FYI, a blast email is fine. Or if I want to assign or delegate something simple, I can use email. But if it starts to get more complicated, I'm going to want to call a meeting. If I'm collaborating on anything with my team, this is time for a call or a meeting. Feedback, obviously, a time for a telephone or a meeting. This is client feedback, internal feedback, any of that. You never want to do that on email. If I'm negotiating anything, it should be a dialogue, unless I'm using email as part of my strategy. And finally, if you're resolving conflict, telephone, okay. Meeting is really ideal for that. Remember, your influence over the outcome of this conflict is going to be impacted. So this is why so often mediations are at least done with video conference and ideally done with everybody in the same room. All right, let's talk about meetings for a moment. We all spend a lot of time in meetings, and believe it or not, this is time that's not always wisely spent given the way that we tend to do these things. So the first thing you want to do with a meeting is set time parameters, okay? All right, everybody, we've got half an hour for this meeting, so let's get started. Or you know, hey, I need to speak with you. Can I have 5 minutes of your time? Right? You want to make sure that that time contract is really clear at the beginning of the meeting. Otherwise, you start to lose people's attention if they thought this was a 5-minute meeting and you're still talking 10 minutes in. Or if you, you'll notice that people's attention just starts to meander if it doesn't look like it's wrapping up and you only have 2 minutes left on the meeting. They start to become fidgety, they start to check their phone, whatever it is. So make sure those time parameters are very clear. Have a formal agenda, write it down, put it in front of them. It sets expectations, it shows that you were prepared, and it helps them take the meeting more seriously. Now, obviously, if it's a spontaneous meeting or a quick question or something, you're walking into somebody's office, you want to ask them, then you don't have to walk in with a formal agenda, although if you really want their full attention, it might not be a bad idea. Have a personal agenda. What is it that you intend to get out of this meeting, especially if you didn't call the meeting? So if somebody else calls a meeting and you intend to attend it, especially if it's, you know, a number of the people at your firm are going to be attending this meeting, think about it. What do you want to get out of this? most people just show up to the meeting and they tolerate it and they wait for them to be dismissed and maybe they make a couple of comments and then they go back to what they really wanted to be doing. So, you're showing up in the meeting in such a way that really does not communicate that level of respect that we were talking about earlier. You aren't bringing your full focus or attention or intentionality to that meeting. So come to the meeting with some objective that you hope to accomplish. Even if it's something like, I'm going to demonstrate to my partners that I'm really engaged on this particular topic, or I'm going to make sure that I'm fully supportive because this is Mary's meeting and Mary's an important person in my life. Whatever it is, have a personal agenda or something that you intend to accomplish regardless of whose ever meeting it is or what their agenda might be. Make sure that the follow-ups have clear champions, supervisors, and deadlines so that everybody knows who's doing what and by when, not just, okay, I'll take care of that. Great, by when? Somebody may think that you meant today when in fact you just meant eventually, or perhaps you meant never. So make sure that all of that is crystal clear. Another thing we do a lot of is we make requests, or perhaps we put off making requests because we don't want to feel like we are going to be indebted to someone or vice versa. Maybe we have, a complex relationship to the idea of asking for something. But the fact of the matter is, if we can make requests in a way that is clear and effective, it tends to cut down on the amount of time that passes between the thing that we wanted and the thing that we get. So just a few things to consider. Never make a request by saying, hey, listen, I need you to do me a favor. Because a favor implies that you're going to owe them one later. And it's a lot cleaner if you can couch it as a request. It also is a lot easier to say no, and you want them to have that freedom to say no to whatever it is that you want. It can be yes or it can be no. That's a request. A favor, you really only have one option. You can either say yes, or you can, offend the person or perhaps cause some damage to the relationship. So don't make it personal unless it really is a personal favor that you're asking of them. Most of the time, you can couch just about everything as a request. And the way that you do that is you start by saying, okay, listen, I'm asking for blank. Hey, I'm asking for some extra time from Joe because I have a really important matter right now and I'm going to need some support from this associate. There are a lot of reasons why this makes sense. So that's the next thing you want to do is you need to back this up. Remember, you're making an argument just like anything else. So you want to make sure that the case that you're making has some evidence. There's a lot of reasons that come to mind why this makes sense. Here are three that I can give you. And when you list these three, use you, we, or our language rather than I or me, because chances are the other person doesn't care that this is going to benefit you. It's going to be much more compelling to them if you can help couch this such that they benefit in some way. So make sure your reasons are tied to their agenda and come up with three reasons, just enough to make your case and make this easy to remember. So you might say, I need some more time from our associate Joe to help with this matter. There are a lot of reasons why this makes sense. Here are three that come to mind. Because Joe is part of our firm, this is going to train him on this particular kind of matter. And I can see this being a real benefit to him as he develops himself personally. Also, I know that you are working on something right now that's only taking up 80% of his time, and so I won't ask for any more than the 20% that's left. So again, we made this about the you here so that it's not all about the person asking, but the person who is being asked of. And maybe a third reason might be something like, I know Joe is really eager to learn some other areas of the law or learn about this particular industry, and I'm going to make sure that he gets that so that he can pass that down to the associates that come in under him in the years to come, or whatever it is. So again, these are all reasons that have to do with the greater good. It's not just stuff that benefits the asker of the request. So this is a structure that you're going to find is particularly effective in making requests. It keeps it short. You don't have to come up with this long case to make. You've bulleted this out. Perhaps you've done a little bit of preparation. Again, this is where preparation, that B task, is time well spent, because that means that you're going to go in there, you're going to make sure that your request is efficient, clear, and easy to say yes to for the person who has just heard all of these reasons that help them or something that they care about. And at the end, it's usually a good idea to say, that's why I'm asking for 20% of Joe's time on this particular matter that I'm working for. And then stop talking. Don't justify, don't anticipate their objections, just listen. Chances are that if you've positioned this well, they're just going to say yes, and that'll save you some time. And also, the more that you tend to try to talk their ear off on this, the more annoyed they may become and the less likely they are to give you what you want. So again, this is just a model that you can use to make efficient requests. If you think about it, we make requests all the time. We're making requests of our clients, we're making requests of each other, and we're making requests of our vendors. So we want to make sure that we know how to do this in a way that's going to be not only effective but also efficient. Let's talk about interruptions. We all deal with these. Just while I was on this presentation with you over the last 50 minutes, I had 2 texts come in. I didn't read them, but I saw my phone buzzing, and it reminded me that interruptions can be distracting, they can be a waste of time, and they also tend to promote that switch tasking or that multitasking that I urged you to get away from. So turn off email alerts or any other automated interrupter. You know, the email alert that comes in on your screen, if that's really important to you, especially if there's a client emergency or in the middle of a heated trial or something like that, and you've got to be highly responsive, okay, fine, but don't have your phone buzz. Don't have the little, you know, beam boom sound go off every time an email comes in. That tends to pull your attention away from whatever you're working on in a way that is incredibly distracting and just makes your brain work that much harder to stay focused on whatever it is that you're doing. Answer email in chunks if at all possible. I know that this isn't always possible, but to the extent that you can, it's a good idea to answer the email in batches. Because if you answer them one at a time as they come in, you are wasting so much time in switch tasking. It's sort of like, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with you. Whoop, oh, let me just go over here and move this piece of paper. Okay, now I'm going to have a conversation with you. Oh, let me just go back over here and move this piece of paper a little bit further. Okay, now I'm going to have the conversation with you. You see how inefficient this starts to become, not to mention the fact that whatever it was I was trying to say to you isn't getting said. So that's another interruption to manage. Let the phone ring. Typically, we have, you know, caller ID so we can see who it is anyway, and if we don't recognize the number, that's what voicemail is for. So let it capture the message. We can always return the voicemail in a timely manner when we have the time to focus on those voicemails. Again, listen to voicemail in batches. It's more efficient than listening to voicemails one at a time. Also, you may want to leave an outgoing voicemail message that just says, hello, you've reached David Ackert. Please leave a voicemail for me, and I will promise to return your call within 24 business hours or by the same business day, if at all possible, or something like that. That, again, reinforces this brand as the responsive attorney, but it also gives an expectation to them that they may not hear from you, you know, within 10 minutes, and that should be okay. You can even also say something like, if this is more urgent than that, feel free to text me or feel free to send an email. You know, whatever the instructions you want to leave so that they feel taken care of, but you don't feel like your time has to be dictated by their timeline. It's always a good idea to schedule a closed door period to the day. For those of you who have doors on your offices, if you work in a cubicle, you can use a noise-canceling earphones to discourage distractions. That way, if somebody just wants to chit-chat with you, they may be discouraged to do that. You know, the open door kind of invites people to pop their head in and say, hey, do you have a minute? And you might not have had a minute. So if they can't catch your line of sight or they can't catch your eye, chances are they're going to leave you alone. So that's just a strategy that you're going to find useful. It's also a good idea to face away from the door or the opening. Set your desk up so that it's harder for them to catch your eye unless you want them to. And if they do barge into your office and say, hey, listen, I need to talk to you, it's a good idea to just say to them, that's fine, but I only have 5 minutes because I'm working on an urgent item. Again, it's that time contract. Set expectations on how much of their time you are willing to let them monopolize with something that is probably not as important as the A that you're working on, but either because of their seniority or because of the fact that this is an urgent matter for them. You want to give them, obviously, your attention, but you also want to make sure that this doesn't derail whatever else that you're working on that they may not have been aware of. So these are just ways to communicate to maximize efficiency in the office. They may not always work given the culture of your firm or the people that you're dealing with, but it's a good idea to have them at the ready so that you can use them as appropriate. All right, so here we are at the end of our agenda. We've gone through some tactics for managing yourself. Again, I would emphasize those as being even more critical than managing others because you really don't have much control over other people, but you have more control over yourself. And so make sure that you're addressing this issue of multitasking. I bet if you put some awareness on it, you're going to catch yourself with the remainder of the day doing quite a bit of this. Try to focus on uni-tasking. Trust me, you're going to save yourself time on that. Identifying those time wasters and addressing them, so those 3 time wasters that you wrote down and the amount of time they take and the amount of money that's costing you, hopefully that's some incentive to put some controls in place to minimize those time wasters. And then, of course, putting some sort of proactive workflow system. We talked about setting up daily targets. We looked at how to integrate a proactive workflow system into Outlook and into your email system, and then this regular goal review, which you'll find to be a very satisfying, I think, and productive use of time. And then we talked about managing others, the hierarchy of communication, managing meetings, making requests, and minimizing interruptions. So we have a few moments left. I want to make sure I'm honoring our time contract. So with the, let's see, it looks like 4 minutes remaining. Lindsay, if we have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thanks so much, David. I suspect that that we've all had our eyes opened today a little bit to some of the ways that we're wasting time. I know I certainly have. I don't see any questions coming in at the moment. You actually answered the one that I had about dealing with those C items, which is great. So while we're waiting to see if anything comes in, I will remind everybody that our next webinar with David takes place on September 22nd from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on business concepts for business lawyers, understanding the drivers your clients care about. And also we will be sharing the PDF of the presentation slides as well as the recording. The recording is going to be available on YouTube. So if there's any piece of this that you want to take a little bit of extra time with, dealing with your Outlook, how to set certain things up, you'll have the opportunity to watch that on your own time and take those lessons to heart, which I think will be a great opportunity. So really, thank you so much, David. This has been great.
Always a pleasure, Lindsay. Thanks so much, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today.
Okay, we'll see everybody in September. Thanks so much.
Bye.